Liberty University, Hughes 512.
Hi, this is Curtis Rernestead. I'm here for Liberty University, the hius 512 class. This is regarding assignment or speaking assignment number 2. Upon reading this assignment relating to American nationalities being founded and the distinction between the way Jefferson did it in the Declaration as opposed to Thomas Paine did in Common Sense, the first thing that came to mind was this particular location, and I couldn't help but want to come to this location for this purpose. I'm actually here at what's known as the Conference House. It was built in 1680, but this location is actually where on September 11th in 1776, Benjamin Franklin, Ed Rutledge, as well as John Adams met with Lord Howe as the last chance for Americans to remain as Englishmen. This was the last chance before the primary part of the war. The British forces had just arrived here a few weeks before. This was only after about 7 weeks after the Declaration, or about 8 weeks after the Declaration was signed. So the interesting thing is as it pertains to the distinction between these two documents, Thomas Jefferson was talking about in the Declaration how this was willed by God and nature. That was one of the big distinctions. The equivocal in that in Thomas Paine's work is where he talks about how people are born as equals. So like the king has no more status under God than really anybody else. And the idea, he actually thought it was very much a folly that there was an idea that because somebody was born as a child or a descendant of a king, that somehow they knew better. As a matter of fact, he actually specifically talks about how they can have an ass as a lion, and it really didn't make a whole lot of sense. The other distinction is how Jefferson talks about how the king refused the naturalizations from foreigners, for people that were looking to come to America and who weren't necessarily Englishmen. The other interesting thing here is that Thomas Paine, on his side, when he's talking about some of these ideas in Common Sense, he's actually more addressing everybody as if they were Englishmen, as opposed to Thomas Jefferson, where he's really talking to purely this new idea of new Americans. So it was kind of an interesting distinction to see how Common Sense, which of course was earlier, was written for Englishmen as opposed to the Declaration, where it's basically saying we're declaring we're no longer Englishmen. The other thing is that at this point, Jefferson in the Declaration, as opposed to Paine's work in the Common Sense, he's already essentially asserting that America is already separate. It's already been separate. This is a separate nation. We're a separate people. We're a separate nationality, essentially. We are not Englishmen anymore. And again, as opposed to Paine, who he is consistently addressing everybody as if they were still Englishmen. Now, the other interesting thing is I couldn't help but kind of do some counting work on reading some of these documents. And I noticed, if you want to just kind of give a little bit more ammo to my argument for this, in the Declaration, the word English or England was really only used when they were talking about kind of eliminating the idea, as opposed to in Common Sense, where England was referenced 37 times, the Crown was referenced 11 times, and even Great Britain was mentioned 4 times. So again, you can see the distinction between these documents, where this newfound idea of an American nationality that starts forming during this time period. And again, the Declaration is already affirming that it's already happened, as opposed to Common Sense, where they're saying, hey, we're Englishmen, but we're looking to become something. So, and I could also see how Common Sense would have been popular still in England, because a lot of it was really against the king, in as much it was as, hey, we're a separate people, we're going to remain so, and that's the way it is. So again, this location couldn't help but come to mind. I'm fortunate enough to only live about 25 minutes from here. I want to come here at this unbelievably historic location because I couldn't think of a better place to make the argument about how America was at this point becoming its own people, its own group, its own individuals. And this essentially was the very, very, very last spot where I would argue that at this moment, on September 11th in 1776, this is when exactly this comes to fruition, where Americans become its own people after having one last shot at trying to have some sort of idea for peace. And it was Benjamin Franklin and the other 2 forefathers that essentially left Lord Howe and said, doesn't look like it's working out, we couldn't come to terms, and then we continued. So
Thanks for watching.